Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if singing with someone who has dementia is more helpful than just talking to them? This new study explores just that. Today we're diving into a fascinating pilot study that asks a really important question when it comes to boosting the well-being of people with dementia. Does music have a special power, or other social activities just as good? Researchers noticed that while music-based therapies for dementia show promise, there is a lot of variation in how studies are done and what they find. A big mystery is whether the benefits come from the music itself or if it is just a simple act of participating in a fun group activity that makes a difference. This study wanted to figure that out by comparing singing to just plain conversation. Dementia is a tough challenge affecting memory and thinking. For folks with dementia, things like medications often don't work very well for the behavioral symptoms that can come with it. This can be super stressful for professional caregivers. That is why scientists are looking hard at non-drug approaches. Music is particularly interesting because people with dementia often still have their ability to process music. Even when other cognitive skills decline, music can bring joy, and some research shows it can help with those challenging behaviors and improve quality of life. But, as the researchers point out, the evidence can be a bit mixed, and it is not always clear if it is the music itself or just the social interaction. They mentioned previous studies that compared music to other activities. And sometimes those differences disappeared when the other activity was made equally appealing. This suggests that maybe it is not just the music, but the whole experience. So, the big goal of this study was pretty neat. They wanted to design a study that could tease apart the effects of music itself from the general good vibes of just being in a group and doing something engaging. They decided to try a special kind of study called a crossover design. Here is how they did it. They got 15 folks living in a nursing home who had dementia. Each person participated in two different types of group activities. One was a singing activity and the other was a conversation activity. The key here is that these activities were as similar as possible, except for the music. The same trained singers led both groups. For 5 weeks, they'd do one type of activity, then after a break, they'd switch to the other for another 5 weeks. This way, each person experienced both before and after these 5-week periods. The researchers checked in on the participants. They used a tool called the Neuropsychiatric Inventory Nursing Home Version, or NPI-NH, to look at behavioral symptoms. They also used the Quality of Life in Late-Stage Dementia Scale, or QALYD, to see how the participants were feeling overall. And while the activities were happening, they had observers watching. These observers used the Menora Park Engagement Scale, or MPs, to see how engaged people were. And they observed Emotion Rating Scale, or OERs, to check their emotions or affect. This diagram shows the whole process. They started with a baseline measurement, then did the first intervention period. After a break, the washout period, they did another baseline measurement, then the second intervention period, and the final measurement. This crossover design is clever because it means each person acts as their own control, which can help cancel out individual differences. They ended up with 14 participants with an average age of around 83. They had different types of dementia, like Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, and the severity varied too. They also assessed how severe the dementia was using the Bedford Alzheimer Nursing Severity Scale, or BANS. This helped them understand if the stage of dementia made a difference in how people responded. Let's talk about what they measured. The NPI-NH is a way to see if behaviors like agitation, anxiety, or apathy are happening frequently or severely, and also how much distress it causes to the professional caregivers. The QALYD scale asks about things like sadness, fear, irritability, but also pleasant things like smiling and enjoying activities to get a picture of overall well-being. During the activities, they looked at different kinds of engagement. There is constructive engagement where someone is really involved, passive engagement where they might be present but not actively participating, and non-engagement. They also looked at emotions like happiness, sadness, anger, and fear. Now, for the exciting part, what did they find? First, the singers who led the sessions generally felt they connected well with the participants, and that the participants responded positively in both singing and conversation. This tells us the facilitators felt the sessions were meaningful. Looking at the behavioral symptoms measured by the NPI-NH, the results were a bit mixed. For the participants' own behavior, the singing activity seemed to numerically reduce symptom scores. But the evidence wasn't strong enough to say for sure. The conversation activity, on the other hand, didn't really show an improvement. However, here is a key finding. When they looked at how the professional caregivers felt, there was moderate evidence that the singing activity actually reduced caregiver distress more than the conversation activity. This is interesting because it suggests that even if individual behavior doesn't show a drastic change, the singing might be easing the burden on those who care for them. This figure gives us a visual of those findings. You can see the baseline and intervention scores. For NPI total, things look a bit down after singing, but for NPI caregiver distress, the drop after singing is more noticeable. Now, let's look at well-being measured by the Qualit scale. Here is where things get really interesting. The conversation activity showed moderate evidence of improving quality of life. In fact, the improvement in quality of life was actually bigger after the conversation activity compared to the singing activity. This is a bit counterintuitive if we assume music is always superior. This table summarizes those numbers. For Qualit, the conversation activity shows a noticeable drop in scores, meaning improvement, while the singing activity didn't show a significant change in this pilot. What about engagement and emotions during the activities? Interestingly, when they compared singing and conversation, there wasn't a strong difference in how engaged people were or in the emotions they showed, like pleasure or sadness. They found evidence that suggested no real difference between the two activities in terms of constructive engagement, passive engagement, or even feelings of pleasure. One really important finding here relates to the severity of dementia. They found that the more severe someone's dementia was, the less likely they were to show constructive engagement and express pleasure. This makes sense because as dementia progresses, active participation can become more difficult. This highlights how important it is to think about the different needs of people at different stages of dementia. So, what does all this mean? This pilot study showed that their design comparing singing to conversation as an active control was feasible. While the sample size was small, the Bayes factors, which they used to evaluate the evidence, suggested that while both activities had potential, neither clearly outperformed the other in terms of improving behavioral symptoms or quality of life for people with dementia. But they did find some specific effects. Singing did show moderate evidence of reducing caregiver distress, and conversation showed moderate evidence of increasing well-being or quality of life. This suggests that the general act of social interaction and connection, regardless of whether it involves music, can be beneficial. The researchers even bring up Kitwood's theory of person-centered care, suggesting that verbal interaction can help meet needs for connection and validation. They also acknowledge that their study design might have differed from previous ones. For instance, they note that in another study, specific topics were used as discussion starters, which might have made that conversation activity more structured. In their study, the conversation was more free-flowing, which might have benefited that activity. They also mentioned that their singing intervention focused on improvisation, with fewer familiar songs, and that well-known songs are known to be very good at triggering memories. This could be a reason why the music activity might have been disadvantaged compared to other studies. Overall, this pilot study is a great step forward in understanding how to test music interventions for dementia. It shows the value of using a direct comparison with an active control like conversation. While the results didn't show a clear win for singing over conversation, they offered important insights: the need to understand music-specific effects, the link between dementia severity and engagement, and the nuances of what makes both singing and conversation activities most effective. They emphasize that future, larger studies are crucial to confirm these findings and to really pinpoint the best ways to use music for well-being in dementia. It is clear that this kind of research is a team effort, and the authors are grateful to the choir members, care staff, and especially the participants who made this study possible. And of course, a big thank you to all the researchers who contributed their expertise to this project. All ethical guidelines were followed with approval from the nursing home and the university's ethics review board. The consent process was handled carefully, ensuring participants, their families, or legal representatives were informed and gave their permission. Now, my take on this. This study is really well designed for tackling a tricky question. The crossover approach is smart, and using Bayes factors is a good way to handle the small sample size and get an idea of the evidence strength. The findings are nuanced. It is not a simple singing is always better story. The fact that conversation improved quality of life and singing helped caregivers shows that different activities can target different benefits. This aligns with the idea that social connection itself is a powerful therapeutic tool. And music is one way to achieve that, but perhaps not the only way. The relationship between dementia severity and engagement is a vital reminder. For individuals in later stages, focusing on passive, multisensory experiences might be more beneficial than expecting active participation. This also makes me think about how we measure success. The researchers mentioned that the singers sometimes felt private moments of connection with participants, especially those with severe dementia, that perhaps weren't fully captured by the observation tools. This is a limitation, but also an area for future research. Perhaps we need more sensitive ways to capture subtle positive responses. Future research could definitely explore what makes certain songs more impactful, perhaps those with strong personal connections, and it would be fascinating to see if combining singing with other elements like reminiscence could enhance the benefits. Overall, this pilot is excellent in pushing the conversation about how to best support people with dementia. It emphasizes that understanding the how and why behind interventions is just as important as finding out if they work. What do you think about these findings? Does it surprise you that conversation had such a positive impact on quality of life? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into dementia research, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. See you next time.